when he's fully crystallised. If he gets a cracking performance and gets the win, that is when he becomes himself.
I mean, the NRL talk is now starting in earnest, isn't it, with Luke Thompson, and
it deserves to do so.
Part of me thinks he should be playing in the best competition, and unless we can fill Super League up to become the best competition, it's got to be in the NRL.
Yeah, I mean, he's fantastic to watch and enjoyable, and he doesn't ever come across as nasty. He comes across as a genuine hard-working player who's just putting in absolutely everything. And yes, he's got natural talent, but also ounces and ounces of just hard work and commitment.
And he's clearly been coached up well by current coaching staff at St Helens, because he was just he was kind of a young player who you weren't ever sure if he was going to develop until Holbrook came in and made him the best prop in the world for the last 2 years. Okay, highlight of the week. For me, Marshall's try, which was the best try in that game despite all of Saints' brilliance, is pipped by Evold's tackle, only due to the fact that only one of them had any relevance or significance on the end result of their match. So Evold's tackle.
Yeah. That's it.
Predictions, Super Brew, Fantasy, etc. Right. Got to get some things organised here. In the predictions, me and David were both 2 out of 2 last week. I'm on 68%. Alan's on 67% for the season, so we're still battling it out. Close run thing there. Sarah is on 53%, and Tim, you're on 52%. Now, we need to do a way next year where we count all the games for all of us, so we're going to have like a hosts-only Super Brew or something next year. It's the only possibility, I think. And it might make me actually play the Super Brew, because I keep forgetting.
It's just happening, though, isn't it? I mean, and also when I'm surprised my tipping is as high as 52%. But there we go.
In the Super Brew, James Hutchinson wears the yellow cap, but co-host Alan's hold on his top spot is strong, and I think it'll be very hard to see him overtaken at this stage with just 2 matches left. In the Fantasy League, there's no new scores again, so we have to assume that this means Alan Bagley is the champion again. So well done, Alan. Congratulations for going back-to-back. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. And don't forget, for next week's games... I suppose if you count the low league ones as well, games, then you can get your fan views in on that Google form. No excuses next week, because everybody should be watching the one game.
Big games, 4 big games that we're going to be previewing, as well as 2 big games in the women's competition too. But we're now, before we get to that, going to look back on the other important, crucial playoff results from around the world of Rugby League.
Right, now time for the other results section, and starting with the championship playoffs. And in the whatever it is to face Toronto next week game, it finished Toulouse 12, Featherstone 36, live on Sky on a Sunday night, and we did have a fan view in on this one.
Yeah, Mike Dodd 22 said, an anxious week of wondering aways. Am I taking my girlfriend on holiday to Toronto or Featherstone next year? Personally, the choice of Toronto or Toulouse was a bit more appealing. Featherstone does have 2 hotels. One's a 3-star hotel and one's a 5-star hotel. I know this from their Wikipedia page.
So there's a good chance that if Toronto, for example, as they're talking about, play a game at BMO Field next year, they could have a stadium and have more people in that stadium than the entire population of Featherstone.
Well, the entire population of Featherstone at the last census was 13,500 or something, wasn't it? I think estimates currently have it at about 14,000.
14,000, yeah.
Something like that. So yeah, it's very possible that we can have a bigger crowd in Toronto at a game next year than the entire town holds of Featherstone. But it's also entirely possible that we could have Featherstone in Super League next year with the way that they are playing, Tim. Toulouse never had an opportunity to get into their fluent attacking rhythm, and I think in the commentary of this game they started pulling out Toulouse for some little bits of play, saying it was panicky. It wasn't. It was Toulousey, but it maybe looked like it was panicky because it wasn't coming off, and it wasn't coming off partly because William Bartow's gone backwards in the last 2 seasons since when he was at the London Broncos and is not as good as Stan Roban, who he had to replace for this game. But partly because Featherstone just absolutely gritted it out and were fantastic at covering pretty much every opportunity that Toulouse were creating for themselves, and at the other end of the field as well were first to everything.
Yeah, and there's another thing, I think, again, as you sort of touched on last week, although you called him James Ford, Jonathan Ford, again, big game. Where was he?
Oh, well, he's not...
He fully Frenched it, didn't he? Just disappeared.
He popped up a couple of times. He actually took a carry in towards the line, John Ford did. So, he wasn't fully absent this week as much as last week, I think. But it wasn't his type of... I just don't know. I do think he actually involved himself a lot more than last week. But there wasn't supporting cast because everyone wasn't where they should be. Because Featherstone rattled them. There's no doubt about it, Featherstone rattled them. I mean, getting that try early on, using those massive in-goal areas to full advantage. Dane Chisholm and Callum McClellan were very complimentary of each other and very good in the game, certainly.
Yeah. The one question for me with Featherstone is, if they do happen to go up, how sustainable are they going to be without the Leeds, the Leeds contingent coming in every week to sustain them? They're going to have to do some heavy recruitment.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that when we do the predictions, maybe. Let's use this part to focus on the positives before we tear Featherstone apart later on. But
let's give them some credit that their fans weren't total dickheads this week.
It seems that some of them were topless dickheads, but not total dickheads. No, they celebrated and deservedly so, didn't they? And to be honest, they had so many strong performers in this game. It was kind of like what we just talked about in the Super League, whereas this side had 8 and 9 out of 10s across the park, and the other side had 6 and 7 out of 10s across the park, and maybe a couple of poor performers as well. In the Toulouse. I think William Bartow's kicking game, I mean, I'm not sure what the strategy was in the first half with all the kicks to touch, and I'm certainly not sure what he kept doing, doing his little short kicks, but straight to the defender, and one of those really...
there were a few nice passes that went straight in.
Full lengther.
Yeah. And I thought, the Featherstone forward stood up well, and in particular... Jack Bussey stood out towards the end of the second half as well, coming on strong.
Yeah, John Davies obviously was, and James Lockwood, they were both fantastic throughout as well. And I really like the look of James Harrison, the second rower, who's stood out off the bench in the first 2 games, stood out from the start in this game as well. Plus they had that injury early on, didn't they, to Conor Carey? That kind of meant they had to play without one man on the bench for pretty much 70 minutes of this 80 minutes, but the game was won after an hour, and then everything Toulouse did just didn't come off, unfortunately for them. They still had some really... I think, most of their big men played well. Patarika Vaivai, James Bell, Joe Breverton, Jordan Desario, Brendan Santi. I thought they were all really good. I think fire was met with fire in the front rows. I just think that... Featherstone just kept coming at everyone throughout the game and didn't give the opportunities at all for Toulouse to do anything. Toulouse couldn't cope with what was a physical game, whereas Featherstone clearly could.
Yeah, fair play to him.
Yeah, definitely. Well done to Featherstone. The Flat Cappers fly out to Toronto for a big prize of Super League at the end of that one. League One promotion playoffs, and this is hope. If Wigan needed hope, if Wigan can overcome Salford this weekend, this Newcastle versus Doncaster game is what they need to look towards, because 2 weeks ago Doncaster pummeled Newcastle on their own paddock, and this time it was totally the opposite. It finished Newcastle 34, Doncaster 4. I watched most of this game on the R League app, and I have to say Newcastle were fully deserving of this game. Former Super League youngster Kieran Gill scored a hat-trick. very good performances from him, from Lewis Young, the fullback, who we talked about his new deal last year and bigged him up. I think all around Newcastle were just much the better team, with Keil Carlisle pulling all the strings from dummy half.
Yeah, didn't see much of this, but fair play to Newcastle. They're definitely a team I'm backing and enjoy it, or partly because of the Nick Newman connection. But they did look very good, when I saw them. So
yeah, there was one or two Rangi Chase flashes for Doncaster, which gives people some
hope for next year.
To clip off and watch on social media, which is excellent too. But Thunder were thoroughly the better side in this match. Okay, into the Women's Super League. St Helens, big result over at St Helens.
Spoiling the record.
Sorry?
Spoiling the Cass record.
Yes, definitely. So it was St Helens 20, Castleford 14. Castleford's first league defeat of the year came in the final round of the Women's Super League this year. It's got to be the case that those two are favourites for the grand final back in St Helens, but this time hopefully it will able to be at the Totally Wicked Stadium in 2 weeks. Well, the night before the grand final. Elsewhere, Featherstone 26, Wakefield 0, and Leeds 16, Wigan 0. Bradford and York, their match was postponed due to the ridiculously bad weather over the weekend. So much rain fell in the north.
Did you see what the York players did?
No.
They all got their Hawaiian shirts on and went down and watched the Featherstone game.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So they're all pretty much 30 of them were all down there watching that game, looking absolutely amazing in their various Hawaiian shirts.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah. So we already knew that Castleford Saints, Leeds, and Wigan would be going into the playoffs. So we'll preview those semi-finals in the predictions section of the show. But before we get to that, we'll talk about the NRL finals, Tim.
Yeah, I watched this one on Friday morning, and it was the Raiders 16, South Sydney Rabbitohs 10. So John Bateman 108 metres, little Joshy Hodgson 48 tackles, Elliot Wade also ran, and for the Rabbits, Sam made 146 metres and Tom 100 metres as the gang broke up for the. Now that's it.
I mean, Sam's 146 metres has to have the credit due for how battered and bruised he was to kept coming back on the field and kept having the carries. But although he made a lot of ground, he didn't have as much impact as the three on the other side of the field, who probably timed their interjections into the game better. But the Raiders really they toughed this out. They just about hung on for this game, really. It felt like at certain times, and especially with the Charles Nickel Clockstad Simbin in for the last 10 minutes of the game, really put them under the pump. And that was when you saw Bateman and Whitehead make copious amounts of double efforts in defence, and really show their grit and steel and the characteristics that make them fantastic.
And Josh
players.
Papali stood up then as well, both in defence and then in attack as well. But
Papali was fantastic.
He really pushed in and did an excellent work in particularly in that 10 minutes. I
mean, he's in the conversation for best front rower, I think, in the world at the moment, the way he's been playing in the last 2 months of the season. He had a poor early part to this season, did Josh Papali, and he's certainly turned that around. But this means that we've got at least 3 of the 4 of the Fab Four at the Raiders will play next week. I feel a bit sorry for Sutton missing out. I think he's been better than a couple of the players that have been putting the side ahead of him the last few weeks, and he's got Super League grand final winning experience. He must be still carrying a knock, or.
Well, you look at that bench: Simonson, Gula, Horsburgh, and Demarnus Louis. He's got to get in ahead of them, surely.
Well, they like the ginger kid, don't they? They think he's got a bit about him. He's kind of a character who really puts himself about. They like having Simonson on the bench, and it kind of came good for them in this game with the injury for Joey Leilua. But maybe maybe next week Sutton can find his way back on the bench, because he's certainly an outstanding player who won't let them down. But well done to the Raiders. I'm sure we're all going to be backing them next week, unless you are a Roosters fan, because it's the Roosters that they're going to meet. They beat the Storm 14 points to 6.
Or if you've just moved house.
Yeah. I've not got round to watching the Roosters versus the Storm, but well done to the Roosters.